Okay, so in this video we're going to talk about using the Internet Service Database to deny known malicious traffic both inbound and outbound. So if you worked with FortiGates for any amount of time, you know here we have as long as your FortiGate is licensed, you'll have full access to updated ISDB objects. So this makes it easy to allow known applications that our users use during their workday, right? So just a quick example. If I know at my office my users use Zoom, I can just make a policy that allows the Zoom ISDB object. And this is helpful because this basically prevents you from having to maintain a list of domains and IP addresses and ports used, right? Especially if you're maintaining like a very strict policy set where you want to have really granular control on what you're allowing on the network. So this is useful for allowing stuff, but a lot of people don't know. If we scroll to the bottom here, we actually have this IP reputation database section where we actually have malicious objects. So we can use these in our policies to deny outbound traffic to these known destinations. And we can also use these inbound. So if we were exposing servers like a web server or a mail server or some internally hosted application, whatever it might be, we can use these to further protect our services that are on our network from the internet. So what we'll do here is we'll just do a quick example of this. So first we'll just focus on outbound traffic, right? So we can see just in this lab environment, if we look at my outbound traffic, I have a little test Wi-Fi network, I got this LAN network, and I got this port 5 that I have some servers connected to. So what we'll do to actually do all this is first we'll create one that is blocking all of the known malicious objects that we just reviewed, right? So you can name this whatever you want, but I'll just name this deny malicious ISDB. For our incoming interfaces, we'll specify all of our internal networks that we want to protect here. So we'll do our port 5, our SSID, and our LAN interface. Our outgoing interface will do our WAN 1 and WAN 2. I don't have SD-WAN on here for internet. For source, we'll do all. And then for our destination, we'll hit destination here, change this drop down to internet service. And then we can, if we scroll to the bottom now, so here they're in alphabetical order, so we'll have to search them, right? So we know we have Botnet, so we'll add this one. There's one for malicious servers. There's one for phishing servers. There's one for spam. There's also one for proxy. And we'll add the Tor nodes here, so the Tor relay node and the Tor exit nodes. And there is a anonymous VPN, which is good to block too. And then there's a Bitcoin, or should there at least be a Bitcoin one? There it is. So blockchain, not Bitcoin. So blockchain mining. So obviously, you might work for a company that works with this, but in most cases we're going to deny this. So we'll add that in there. We'll change our action to deny. And we want to log this traffic, right? So we will put that in there. And then we will move that above our policy. So there's a couple more that I don't like to group them together because your mileage may vary, right, depending on what you need to block in your organizational requirements. So what I'd like to do also is create another one. Actually, what we'll do is just do this. So we'll just copy this and paste below. ISDB optional. Right, so we'll remove all these since we're already blocking them in that original policy. And what I like to do also in most cases is block the bulletproof hosting. It helps if you switch it to ISDB. So we have here this bulletproof hosting entry. So bulletproof hosting is essentially infrastructure that's known for ignoring abuse complaints, right? So a lot of bad actors will host their malware payloads or their command and control servers here, and this infrastructure is less likely to take servers down when they receive complaints. So you get a lot of malicious stuff hosted on these. So I like to block this outbound. If you have any instances where traffic is getting wrongly denied, you can always make an exception. But for the most part, I like to block that. And then in most cases, also, I like to block mail.ru. So they have all of these ones. So I usually just block all of them. So we'll do the same thing here. So we'll keep it as deny, remove this comment. We'll log the violation traffic, and then we can add this policy. So now we have two policies that are using the FortiGuard ISDB objects to deny outbound traffic to these destinations. And it's important to log and monitor this, because if you have a device that triggers this, that is a potential IOC, and you can use that to do further investigation on a potentially compromised endpoint or a bad actor in your environment, right? So I'll show you just an example of that triggering. So if you actually go to one of these objects, we can view the entries, and we can actually see all of the IP addresses and ports that are associated with these objects. So just as a test, I have a test machine here. So if I drag this over here, right, and if I try to go to this known malicious IP address, that should trigger on our policy. So you can see here we're getting traffic there. So if we show the matching logs on that, we can see that this device is triggering our deny malicious ISDB object, and we can see the destination, and we can see the actual ISDB entry that it's triggering. So what you would do is you would monitor these policies, and if you see this, you would then trigger an investigation on this endpoint to see why they are communicating with this endpoint. So one last thing I think is worth mentioning is, especially since we're on 7.4, is that you notice when I made the policies that I added them individually, right? So I didn't group them together. So in 7.4 and earlier, you cannot create via the GUI ISDB group objects, but you can do it via the CLI. So if you wanted to make this cleaner, you could do that. So if you wanted to go into the CLI, do config firewall internet service group, you could create one, right? So here you could set member, and you could set your members in here, and then create groups, and then from your policies, if you edit them, you would see the group in here. So that's just a quick tip if you wanted to make this cleaner and not have all these individual objects, right? Especially if you're going to be putting a bunch of them. I don't mind this, but some admins are different. So that's it for the outbound ISDB, and now we'll get into protecting our internet exposed resources from the internet with. Okay, so now we'll talk about protecting our internet exposed resources with the ISDB objects, right? So let's just take this quick example I have here. So let's just say we have a exposed web server, right? So this is exposed to the internet, right? So obviously what we want to do is protect that as much as we can, right? So let's just say we know that people from the United States are going to be our users for this site. So we see here we have our allow rule that says, okay, from USA, IP addresses allow access to the web server. And a lot of people will think, okay, well, that's good. I'm only allowing USA IPs. I'm not going to have any like APT nations getting in. But obviously we have to be aware of people spinning up services or hosting services within the United States. And we want to block anything that might be malicious or potentially malicious. So you see, I split mine up into 3 rules, and we'll go over what I have in each. So just starting at the top, this is just basically an inverse of the malicious policy that we made for outbound traffic. So we're saying from our WAN interface to our server network, we're going to block all of these, right? And we're going to log that traffic. So that's number 1. We're going to block all of these, and we're going to basically title that as our malicious objects. Then we see we have these scanners. So FortiGuard does a good job of really having most of the scanners that you'll commonly run into. And if you're not aware of these, basically there's a lot of services out there that are constantly scanning public IPs on the internet and then reporting on the data they find. So, what the IP is, what ports are open, what services are running, certificate information. So if you've done any sort of like ethical hacking or open source intelligence or incident response, you're probably aware of these. And, we want to prevent these scanners from getting information about our network, right? So I just have a tab open here just so I can show you. So like Showdown's a popular one. So if I just look up FortiGate, I can see all these public IPs and these ports that are open. And I don't have I'm not logged in, so I can't like dive in and show you all the details. But, if you ever have some free time, come and take a look at this and, explore this website. You can see how much information is out there. So we want to limit our footprint and really just make it as hard as possible for attackers to try to get into our network or even, do reconnaissance on our network, right? So that's what this one is for. We're going to say we're blocking all of the scanner services that are out there, right? So if you just look up scan, right, that's all the ones that I put in here. So you can just look those up and then just paste all of these like I did. And then for the next one, we'll get into blocking hosting services. So like we said before, just doing geo-blocking isn't enough. The attackers that are in countries that are not the United States will try to spin up a VM in AWS or Azure or DigitalOcean or any other one of these hosting services. And now that I actually said DigitalOcean, I don't think I added that one. So let me see if I can just, right, so we'll add this one. So you can see I'm blocking all these public clouds and all these hosting services that attackers can use to spin up VMs for the purpose of malicious activity. So I'm blocking all of these. Depending on the size of your organization or what your organization is doing, what services you guys run, this might be a little too restrictive. So you might want to, for example, let's say your organization hosts a lot of services, or they have like virtual desktops in Azure. Maybe you have a lot of employees. There's a lot of virtual desktops. Maybe you have like contractors and stuff, or maybe you have exposed apps, and then you have services in Azure to do like QA testing or some other sort of like application testing, and you need to only block certain regions of these cloud platforms. You can do that. So I will show you here. So like we can use like Azure for an example. You can see I'm blocking the entirety of Azure. We can see like there's 50 million IPs. This might be a bit too restrictive depending on your use case. So it's good to know that you can create an internet service object. So what we can do is, right, so we can search for Azure. So we'll select Azure, and then we can see we have all the different countries. So let's say we only wanted to block, let's pick on Bulgaria. So we can select Bulgaria, any region, any city, and we can name this Azure BG. Right, so then if we go into this guy again and we view the entries, we can see it's only going to pick out the IPs that are associated with that specific region within Azure. So that allows you to get a little bit more granular. So if you only wanted to allow or block certain regions of some of these hosting platforms, that is good. So, but if that doesn't apply to you, you can start with just blocking all of it, and then if you realize that you need to only block certain regions, you can just do what I just did there. So feel free to copy these 3 policies. This is a good baseline. And that is going to be it for leveraging ISDB objects to protect north and south traffic. Thanks for watching.